What if I told you that one of Christianity's most sacred relics might be far older than the Catholic Church has admitted for decades? The Shroud of Turin, believed by millions to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, just underwent groundbreaking new chemical analysis. And what scientists discovered doesn't just challenge 500 years of religious doctrine, it completely contradicts it. Before we dive into this mind-blowing revelation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into mysteries that shake the foundations of what we thought we knew. The Shroud of Turin has captivated believers and skeptics alike for centuries. This 14-foot-long linen cloth bears the faint image of a man who appears to have suffered crucifixion. The marks match the biblical description of Christ's death with stunning accuracy. Wounds in the wrists, feet, and side, marks consistent with a crown of thorns, evidence of scourging across the back. For the faithful, it's tangible proof of the resurrection. For scientists, it's been one of history's most perplexing mysteries. The controversy really exploded in 1988, when the Vatican finally allowed carbon dating tests on small samples of the cloth. 3 independent laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona all reached the same shocking conclusion. The shroud dated to between 1260 and 1390 AD. This meant the cloth was created over 1,000 years after Jesus walked the earth. It had to be a medieval forgery, a clever fake designed to draw pilgrims and their money. The Catholic Church grudgingly accepted these findings, though many believers refused to abandon their faith in the relic's authenticity. For over 30 years, that carbon dating result stood as scientific consensus. Case closed, or so everyone thought. But here's where things get fascinating. A team of Italian chemists recently conducted a completely different type of analysis using advanced techniques that weren't available back in the 80s. Instead of focusing on carbon dating, they examined the chemical structure of the cellulose fibers that make up the linen itself. What they discovered sent shockwaves through both the scientific and religious communities. The cellulose showed a degree of natural aging that's completely inconsistent with a medieval origin. We're talking about chemical breakdown at the molecular level, thus the kind that can't be faked and takes an enormous amount of time to occur naturally. Lead researcher Dr. Liberato De Caro and his team used a method called wide-angle X-ray scattering. This technique allows scientists to measure the natural degradation of cellulose chains in ancient fabrics with remarkable precision. Think of it like counting the rings in a tree, but at the molecular level. As linen ages, its cellulose polymers break down in predictable patterns. The rate of this breakdown is affected by temperature and humidity, but it follows consistent chemical laws that can't be artificially accelerated without leaving obvious traces. When the team analyzed the shroud's fibers using this method, they compared the results to other ancient linen samples with known dates. They tested fabric from the siege of Masada in Israel, which dates to between 55 and 74 AD. They examined linens from ancient Egypt spanning multiple periods. They even tested the Dead Sea Scrolls wrappings. Every single comparison pointed to the same stunning conclusion. The Shroud of Turin's cellulose degradation matches fabrics from around 2,000 years ago, give or take a couple of centuries. That places it right in the time period when Jesus would have been crucified. So how do we reconcile these completely contradictory findings? On one hand, we have carbon dating from 1988 saying medieval. On the other, we have cutting-edge chemistry from 2024 saying ancient. Both can't be right. Or can they? This is where the plot thickens in ways nobody expected. And some scientists now believe the 1988 carbon dating may have tested a contaminated sample, specifically a section of the shroud that had been repaired in medieval times. Historical records show the shroud survived a fire in 1532 that badly damaged it. Nuns in Chambéry, France, carefully repaired the cloth, patching holes and reinforcing edges. It's entirely possible that the samples cut for carbon dating in the 80s came from these repaired sections or from areas that had absorbed smoke and contaminants from the fire. Carbon dating works by measuring the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 in organic material, but it can be thrown wildly off track by contamination. If medieval threads were woven into the original fabric during repairs, or if the cloth absorbed significant carbon from candle smoke and handling over centuries, the test would return a much younger date. Critics of this contamination theory point out that the labs in 1988 used cleaning procedures designed to remove surface contamination. But here's the thing. If medieval cotton threads were actually woven into the linen during invisible repairs, no amount of surface cleaning would reveal that. You'd be testing a blended sample without realizing it. Textile experts have since examined photographs and the shroud itself, and some believe they can identify areas where later repairs used different weaving techniques. The corners and edges, precisely where the 1988 samples were taken, show potential signs of this type of restoration work. And the new chemical analysis looked at completely different areas of the cloth and used a method that examines the original linen's molecular structure rather than its carbon content. This approach is immune to the kinds of contamination that can skew radiocarbon results. The cellulose degradation they measured happened over centuries and millennia, locked into the very chemical bonds of the fabric. You can't fake that with medieval smoke or repairs. Either the core linen is genuinely ancient, or someone in medieval times somehow artificially aged it at the molecular level using technology we still don't fully understand today. That brings us to another mind-bending aspect of this mystery. If the shroud really is a medieval forgery, how exactly was it made? And nobody has ever successfully replicated the image's unique properties despite numerous attempts using both period-accurate and modern techniques. The image isn't painted on the surface. There's no pigment, no dye, no ink. Chemical analysis shows the discoloration exists only in the topmost fibers, going no deeper than the very outermost layer of each thread. It's more like a controlled scorch or oxidation than any known artistic technique. The image also has photographic negative properties that weren't understood or even discovered until the invention of photography in the 19th century. When you look at the shroud, you're seeing a negative image. When it's photographed and the negative is developed, and suddenly you see a positive image with remarkable three-dimensional information encoded in the varying intensity of the discoloration. In 1898, when amateur photographer Secondo Pia took the first photographs of the shroud, he nearly dropped his equipment in shock when he developed the plates and saw a positive image emerge. How could a medieval forger create something with properties that wouldn't be understood for another 500 years? Scientists have tried everything to recreate the shroud's image using medieval techniques. They've tried painting, scorching with hot statues, chemical treatments, and various combinations thereof. Some attempts look superficially similar from a distance, but none match the shroud's unique properties under microscopic and chemical analysis. The lack of brush strokes is the superficial nature of the image, the photographic negative quality, the three-dimensional information. These characteristics together create a profile that defies simple explanation. It's either the work of an incredibly sophisticated forger with knowledge far beyond their time, or it's something else entirely. Now let's talk about what this new research means for 500 years of religious doctrine. Ever since the carbon dating results in 1988, the Catholic Church has maintained a cautiously skeptical position. They've continued to allow veneration of the shroud as a devotional icon that inspires faith, but they've stopped short of declaring it authentic. The official position has been that regardless of its age or origin, the shroud serves as a powerful meditation tool for contemplating Christ's passion. This careful diplomatic stance allowed the Church to respect scientific findings while preserving the relic's spiritual significance. But if this new chemical analysis gains wider acceptance in the scientific community, it forces a dramatic recalibration of that position. An authentically ancient shroud from the time of Christ doesn't prove it's Jesus' burial cloth, but it removes the main scientific objection that's dominated discussion for 3 decades. Suddenly, we're back to asking much more profound questions. If this cloth really did wrap a crucified man 2,000 years ago, who was he? How was this image formed? And why does it match the Gospel accounts with such specificity? The implications extend beyond just the Catholic Church. For 500 years, Protestant denominations have largely dismissed Catholic veneration of relics as superstitious, pointing to the shroud as a prime example of medieval fraud. If the shroud turns out to be genuinely ancient, it challenges these long-standing theological positions. It doesn't prove Catholic doctrine correct, but it does suggest that skepticism toward all religious relics might need more nuance. Some objects might actually be what tradition claims they are. There's also a fascinating angle here about the relationship between faith and science. For decades, believers who insisted the shroud was authentic, despite carbon dating, were often dismissed as anti-science zealots who refused to accept empirical evidence. But what if their faith-based intuition was actually closer to the truth than the scientific consensus? Now, it wouldn't be the first time science got something wrong and had to self-correct. The history of scientific progress is filled with overturned paradigms and revised conclusions. Good science requires the humility to revisit questions when new evidence or better methods emerge. The chemists behind this new study are being careful not to make absolute claims. Science doesn't work that way. What they're saying is that the cellulose analysis suggests a much older age than carbon dating indicated, and that contradiction demands further investigation. They're calling for new radiocarbon dating using samples from different areas of the cloth, particularly sections far from edges and repairs. They want their chemical aging method verified by independent laboratories. And they're pushing for a comprehensive multidisciplinary approach that combines archaeology, textile analysis, history, and advanced chemistry. Some skeptics argue this new research is just wishful thinking by believers looking for any reason to overturn results they never wanted to accept. They point out that the Italian researchers are based in a predominantly Catholic country with cultural and perhaps emotional investment in the shroud's authenticity. But that criticism cuts both ways. The scientific establishment has its own biases and institutional momentum. Once a consensus forms, it takes overwhelming evidence to shift it. Scientists who challenge accepted conclusions often face resistance regardless of their data's quality. The question shouldn't be about the researchers' backgrounds, but whether their methods are sound and their results reproducible. What makes this particular controversy so compelling is that both sides have legitimate points. The 1988 carbon dating wasn't some sloppy operation. It involved 3 world-class laboratories using the gold standard method for dating organic materials. They followed strict protocols and reached consistent results. That's not easy to dismiss. At the same time, this new cellulose analysis uses sophisticated technology and appears methodologically sound. The X-ray scattering technique for measuring polymer degradation is well established in materials science. The comparison samples from known dates provide a solid calibration framework. It's not fringe science or wishful thinking. So where does that leave us? We're in a genuinely uncertain space where contradictory evidence from different scientific methods points in opposite directions. This is actually the most exciting place to be scientifically because it means we don't have all the answers yet. There's still real mystery here, real discovery waiting to happen. The Shroud of Turin remains what it's always been, a puzzle that refuses simple solutions. Here's what we know for certain. The Shroud exists and has a documented history going back at least to the 1300s in Europe. It bears the image of a crucified man created through some process that remains unexplained. Previous carbon dating suggested medieval origin. New chemical analysis suggests ancient origin. These facts are not in dispute. What's disputed is what they mean, and how to reconcile the contradictions. Moving forward, the scientific community needs to approach this with genuine open-mindedness. That means skeptics should acknowledge that the contamination concerns about the 1988 samples are scientifically plausible and worth investigating. It also means believers need to accept that even if the cloth is ancient, that doesn't automatically prove it's Christ's burial shroud. An ancient crucifixion victim's burial cloth is remarkable, but it doesn't prove resurrection or divinity. The Catholic Church faces an interesting decision about whether to allow new testing. Previous investigations have required cutting samples from the cloth, which damages a priceless artifact. And modern techniques can work with much smaller samples or even non-destructive methods, but there's always risk involved. Church officials must balance the desire for answers against their duty to preserve the relic for future generations. There's also the question of whether they even want definitive answers. Sometimes mystery serves faith better than certainty. What's fascinating from a psychological standpoint is how differently people react to this news depending on their prior beliefs. Faithful Catholics see it as vindication, proof that science is finally catching up to what they always knew in their hearts. Skeptics see it as cherry-picking, choosing to elevate results that support a desired conclusion while dismissing stronger evidence that doesn't. Both reactions are understandable, but neither is particularly scientific. And the data is what it is, regardless of what we wish it to be. This situation also highlights something important about how science actually works versus how people think it works. Science isn't a fixed body of unquestionable facts. It's a process of constantly testing ideas against evidence and revising conclusions when better data emerges. The mark of good science isn't never being wrong. It's being willing to change when evidence demands it. If the 1988 carbon dating was compromised by factors researchers didn't fully account for, acknowledging that and retesting isn't a failure of science. It's science working exactly as it should. The Shroud of Turin has survived fires, wars, countless journeys, and now centuries of scientific scrutiny. Whether it's a medieval masterpiece or an ancient mystery, it remains one of the most analyzed artifacts in human history. Every test reveals new layers of complexity. Every answer generates new questions. And now, with this latest chemical analysis contradicting decades of accepted conclusions, we're reminded that even our most confident scientific statements might need revision. What do you think? Does this new evidence change your perspective on the shroud's authenticity? Are you convinced by the cellulose degradation analysis, or do you stand by the carbon dating results? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of mystery that benefits from diverse perspectives. And if you found this deep dive fascinating, you absolutely need to subscribe, because we're constantly exploring the intersection of science, history, and belief, where the most interesting questions live. Oh, the truth is, we might never have absolute certainty about the shroud's origins, and that's actually okay. Some mysteries are valuable precisely because they remain unsolved. They keep us asking questions, seeking truth, and examining our assumptions. The Shroud of Turin has done that for centuries, and it continues to do so today with even greater intensity than before. What's particularly noteworthy is how this discovery reflects broader shifts in how we approach ancient mysteries. We're developing better tools, more sophisticated methods, and increasingly humble attitudes about what we think we already know. The tools available to researchers in 1988 were genuinely state-of-the-art for that time. But technology doesn't stand still. We've learned more about contamination, about how carbon-14 behaves in different environments, about the limitations of radiocarbon dating itself. It's entirely reasonable that these advances would lead us to reconsider previous conclusions. Consider the implications beyond just this single artifact. If the cellulose degradation method proves reliable and reproducible, it could revolutionize how we date ancient textiles worldwide. Museums around the globe hold thousands of fabric artifacts with uncertain provenance. Many rely on carbon dating that might be compromised by similar contamination issues. A new method that's resistant to these problems could reshape our understanding of textile history, trade routes, cultural exchange, and countless historical narratives. The shroud might be famous, but it's just one cloth among millions that could benefit from better dating techniques. The interdisciplinary nature of this investigation is equally important. We're seeing chemists, physicists, textile experts, historians, and archaeologists working together rather than in isolation. This collaborative approach tends to generate more robust conclusions than any single discipline working alone. When a physicist describes the image formation properties, a textile expert analyzes weaving patterns, and a chemist examines molecular degradation, a much fuller picture emerges. This is how science should work, especially when investigating objects that sit at the intersection of multiple fields. There's also something deeply human about why we care so much about this particular piece of cloth. It represents our eternal desire to find tangible connections to history's most significant figures and moments. We want to touch something real, something that was actually there. A photograph of a historical figure isn't the same as an actual object they owned. A description of an event isn't the same as an artifact from that event. The shroud, if authentic, would represent an unbroken physical link stretching back 2,000 years. That's intoxicating to imagine, which is precisely why we should be careful about letting that desire cloud our judgment. But equally, we shouldn't let scientific skepticism become a form of dogma that refuses to consider new evidence. Throughout history, the scientific establishment has sometimes gotten things wrong and resisted correction. The resistance often came from genuine, thoughtful scientists who simply believed the previous consensus was correct. They weren't villains. They were working with the information available and the frameworks they understood. But the frameworks changed, the information improved, and science moved forward. The question before us now is whether we're open enough to let that happen again with the shroud. The sociological aspects of this are worth examining too. Notice how quickly the narrative shifted in different communities. In religious communities, particularly among Catholic faithful, there's a palpable sense of relief and vindication. For 3 decades, they've maintained faith in the shroud's authenticity despite the carbon dating results. Now, they have what feels like scientific validation. In skeptical circles, there's defensive skepticism, yet arguments about methodology and the dangers of wishful thinking. In academic communities, there's cautious interest mixed with concerns about overstated conclusions. These different reactions tell us something important about how science actually functions in human society. Science doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's conducted by humans with backgrounds, beliefs, cultural contexts, and emotional investments. That doesn't make science invalid, but it does mean we should acknowledge these human dimensions openly, rather than pretending they don't exist. A scientist from a Catholic country studying a sacred Catholic relic brings a certain context, but so does a skeptic, determined to protect the integrity of a previous scientific consensus. Both perspectives have value when balanced against actual evidence. Or the question of whether the shroud should be tested further deserves careful consideration. Non-destructive techniques are increasingly available. Scientists can now work with incredibly small samples, use X-ray fluorescence, infrared imaging, and other methods that don't require cutting pieces from the cloth. The Vatican could theoretically grant permission for extensive new analysis without causing further damage. But there's also something to be said for preservation. Even if testing is minimally invasive, it still exposes an irreplaceable artifact to more handling and potential risk. The Church's custodial responsibility extends beyond just allowing scientific inquiry. There's also the philosophical question about whether solving the mystery would actually enhance or diminish the shroud's significance. If scientists conclusively proved it's Christ's burial cloth, that would certainly vindicate believers. But would it change faith? Many theologians argue that faith grounded solely in physical proof isn't really faith at all. Conversely, if testing proved it's a medieval creation, believers would likely find ways to incorporate that into their theology, just as they've incorporated the previous carbon dating results. The shroud's spiritual significance might be somewhat independent of its historical authenticity. What we can say with confidence is that the Shroud of Turin, whether medieval or ancient, whether authentic or artistic, represents something genuinely profound about human nature. It shows our desperate desire for connection to transcendent meaning, our willingness to believe in mysteries we cannot fully understand, and our endless capacity to find wonder in the physical world. These impulses aren't flaws to be overcome through scientific rationality. They're fundamental parts of being human, and they're compatible with rigorous inquiry into truth. The future of shroud studies likely involves multiple lines of investigation pursued simultaneously. Additional radiocarbon dating from untested areas using modern contamination protocols. Continued cellulose degradation analysis by independent laboratories in different countries. Advanced imaging techniques that reveal details invisible to the naked eye. Historical research into the cloth's provenance before the 1300s, which remains frustratingly murky. Textile analysis, comparing it to other ancient fabrics. Chemical identification of all compounds present in the fibers. And none of these approaches alone will provide definitive answers, but together they could narrow the possibilities significantly. What makes this investigation so important isn't necessarily whether the shroud turns out to be authentic. It's the process itself, the willingness to revisit settled questions with new tools and fresh perspectives. It's the reminder that science isn't about achieving permanent certainty, but about progressively improving our understanding. Every answer we find opens new questions. Every technique we develop reveals complexity we hadn't previously perceived. This endless frontier of discovery is what makes scientific inquiry genuinely thrilling. The Shroud has survived longer than any empire, outlasted countless religious and scientific revolutions, and continues to fascinate new generations. It will probably continue to do so regardless of what future testing reveals. Some mysteries have a staying power that transcends their resolution. They become part of our cultural heritage, part of the great conversation humanity has always conducted with itself about meaning, authenticity, and truth. The Shroud has earned that status through centuries of captivating imaginations across cultures and belief systems. As we wrap up this exploration, remember that mysteries like the Shroud remind us why curiosity matters. In a world saturated with competing narratives and certainties, the willingness to sit with ambiguity, to ask difficult questions, and to follow evidence wherever it leads is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. Whether you believe the Shroud is Christ's burial cloth, a medieval masterpiece, or something yet to be fully understood, the genuine interest you take in the question and the evidence matters far more than which conclusion you reach. The conversation continues in the comments section below. Share your thoughts, your interpretations, your objections. That's where the real dialogue happens, where different perspectives collide and produce new insights. And make sure you're subscribed, because we dive deep into mysteries like this regularly. Stories that sit at the boundary between science and belief, history and faith, certainty and wonder. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most captivating enigmas.